Sucks to think that Miyazaki looks fondly on war criminals. I find his attitude rather hypocritical considering Japanese history and all the truly terrible things they did. Miyazaki is talking like the Japanese were pure. For a Japanese guy, he's awfully ironic. He's Japanese and talking shit about war is crazy considering what they did. He thinks the Japan of his youth was a perfect little paradise and that the empire did nothing wrong. Miyazaki should openly talk about the heinous atrocities committed by the Japanese during World War II. Well, he already has, and on many occasions. The comments that I just read were left on my video about Hayao Miyazaki's relationship with the United States, which is complicated, to say the least. The Studio Ghibli co-founder has been highly critical of America over the decades, accusing the US of showing a lack of regret when it comes to its use of atomic bombs, and calling out the country for its actions in Vietnam and Iraq. I discussed all of this in my video, and this led to a flurry of comments from viewers who said that Miyazaki should take a look at the actions of his own country before criticizing America, which is understandable. I agree that it would be highly hypocritical for Miyazaki to call out the US over its military history without acknowledging his own country's past. But the thing is, he's actually well known for speaking about this in Japan. In fact, Miyazaki has been so open about the atrocities committed by the Japanese Imperial Army that he's even been branded as a traitor by some of his compatriots. Miyazaki spoke about Japan's war crimes most recently in November 2024, when he was honoured with a Ramon Magsaysay award, which is kind of like Asia's Nobel Prize. The ceremony was held in Manila, though sadly he wasn't able to attend in person due to a health issue. He sent Studio Ghibli board member Kenichi Yoda to accept the award in his place, and Yoda read out a message from Miyazaki in which he talked about Japan's actions during World War II.
In 2016, the former emperor and empress visited Manila, which was the setting of urban warfare during World War II, to pay their respects to thousands who have lost their lives.
日本人は戦時中ひどいことを散々したんです。
The Japanese did a lot of terrible things back then.
民間人をたくさん殺しました。
They killed many civilians.
日本人はこのことを忘れてはいけません。ずっと残っていくことです。
The Japanese people must not forget this. It will always remain.
そういう歴史がある中で、フィリピンからマグサイサイ賞を贈られるということで、厳粛に受け止めています。
With such history, I solemnly accept the Ramon Magsaysay Award from the Philippines.
本当にありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
This was far from the first time that Miyazaki had used his platform to remind Japanese people that they have a dark past when it comes to war. Back in 2015, a group of business leaders and influential people got together to create something called the Henoko Fund, which aimed to stop the construction of a US military base in Okinawa's Henoko district. Speaking at an event organized to raise awareness of the fund, Miyazaki urged Japan to show remorse for its actions in World War II and appeared to draw comparisons between the main character from his short film Boro the Caterpillar and the regular people who are rendered helpless by military conflict.
I think Japan has to clearly say that aggressive war was completely wrong, and it has to show remorse to the Chinese people who went through enormous damage. I'm here to convey the discontent of people from Okinawa who don't want to have an American military base in Henoko. The piece I'm working on now is about a little caterpillar's life on a leaf. A caterpillar that is so small that any stroke could kill it.
This interview came just a few years after the release of Miyazaki's film The Wind Rises, a fictionalized account of the life of aeronautical engineer Jiro Horikoshi. Horikoshi designed several Japanese fighter planes that were used during the Second World War, most notably the Mitsubishi A6M0. Miyazaki was criticized by some for making a film about Horikoshi, particularly by the press in South Korea, who argued that the Zero fighter was a symbol of Japanese imperialism. The Ghibli co-founder was reportedly upset by this, and he quickly arranged a meeting with Korean journalists in Tokyo to defend both himself and Horikoshi. He told them that Horikoshi was someone who resisted demands from the military, and he added, "I wonder if he should be liable for anything just because he lived in that period." Jiro Horikoshi was the most gifted man of his time in Japan. He wasn't thinking about weapons. Really, all he desired was to make exquisite planes. Miyazaki's love of aircrafts and flight is well documented. He's gone on record as saying that the French aviator and writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry influenced him more than anyone else, and he clearly holds Horikoshi in equally high regard for what he achieved in the aeronautical field. The Ghibli co-founder once said that the Zero represented one of the few things we Japanese could be proud of, adding, "They were a truly formidable presence, and so were the pilots who flew them." However, that does not mean that The Wind Rises is in any way a celebration of what Japan did during World War II. In fact, it's quite the opposite. During his promotion of the film, Miyazaki penned an essay for the Studio Ghibli magazine Neppu, in which he made his feelings on Japan's actions during the Second World War perfectly clear. He wrote, "I was born in 1941 and had a strong feeling in my childhood that we fought a truly stupid war. Many times I heard adults speak boastfully of the horrible things that they had done in China. I heard many stories and I started to think that I had been born in a country that had done stupid things, and I truly started to hate Japan." Of course, Miyazaki's relationship with Imperial Japan is complicated by the fact that his father helped the Japanese army wage war in the Pacific. Katsuji Miyazaki was the director of Miyazaki Airplane, a company owned by his brother. During the Second World War, they actually made rudders for the Zero fighter, so Miyazaki's family was directly involved with the very planes that made Horikoshi famous and made Japan a force to be reckoned with in the air. Knowing this, it's tempting to view The Wind Rises as a film designed to shift the blame away from Miyazaki's father and uncle for what they did during wartime. After all, Miyazaki has made it clear that he doesn't think that Horikoshi should be judged for what the army decided to do with his creation. However, that's absolutely not the case when it comes to his family. Katsuji Miyazaki and his brother weren't in it for the love of aviation, and they weren't even patriots according to Miyazaki, who has said that they simply saw it as a chance to make a lot of money. What's more, they were completely unreflective about the part they played in Japan's war machine, and this led to some heated clashes between Miyazaki and his dad when he entered his teenage years. In his essay, Miyazaki recalled how he argued bitterly with his father while trying to get him to acknowledge his war responsibility. The part of Miyazaki's essay that caused the most controversy relates to so-called comfort women, a term used to describe females who were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese army before and during World War II. Brothels were set up for soldiers all over occupied countries and territories in Asia, with women being kidnapped, coerced, or even sold by their parents in some cases. Proof of the existence of these so-called comfort stations was destroyed following the war, so the exact number of victims remains unknown, though scholars say it's possible that as many as 200,000 women passed through these places. According to the UN's Global Tribunal on Violations of Women's Human Rights, it's estimated that 90% of comfort women were dead by the time the war ended, and those who survived lived on in silence for decades. It wasn't until the 1980s that Korean survivors started coming forward about their harrowing experiences, and diplomatic relations between South Korea and Japan became strained in 1990 when a Japanese politician flat out denied that comfort stations were a real thing. However, the Japanese government officially recognized their existence in 1993, and a series of apologies from various officials were made in the coming years, including from several prime ministers. Reparations were finally made in 2015, but to this day, there are people who believe that the apologies and payouts did not go far enough. Among them is Hayao Miyazaki, who wrote about Japan's treatment of these women in his Neppu essay. He said, "For the comfort women issue, because it's a question of each nation's pride, we have to properly apologize and pay compensation." This statement from Miyazaki triggered a passionate response in Japan, with people taking to forums and comment sections to criticize the anime icon. Many pointed out that apologies had already been made and came to the conclusion that Miyazaki had an irrational hatred of his own country, pointing to The Wind Rises as proof. "This anime is definitely anti-Japanese," one person said, and many others chimed in with various insults. Miyazaki was branded dim-witted, an old coot, and perhaps the most cutting of the lot, a traitor. The truth is that Miyazaki mentioning comfort women in this essay was actually a dig at Shinzo Abe, who was, of course, assassinated in Nara Prefecture in 2022. Abe was at the start of his second stint as Prime Minister of Japan when Miyazaki was writing his piece for the Ghibli magazine, and during his first term he had caused a stir when he walked back Japan's admission of guilt in relation to military brothels, insisting that there was no actual proof that these women had been coerced. Miyazaki didn't mention Abe by name in his essay, but he openly criticised the Prime Minister's rhetoric about scrapping the peace clause in the Japanese constitution so the country could remilitarize. He wrote, "I understand how some people do not want to see the history of Japanese militarism. However, if you are a politician of the country called Japan, if you aren't educated about this and do not seek to find out about it for yourself, you simply will not be able to cut it in international society." Over the next few years, Miyazaki's stance on Abe hardened further and his vocal opposition to the PM became increasingly overt. In 2014, Abe approved a reinterpretation of Article 9 of Japan's constitution, allowing for the country to engage in military action if an ally came under attack. The argument was that failing to defend or support an ally would weaken alliances and endanger Japan, and the move went down well with several Asian countries, with the likes of the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia all expressing support. There were plenty of people in Japan who were also happy about this, and the debate is still raging to this day. Opinion polls suggest that the Japanese public remains heavily divided on the issue, and revisionists often hold rallies on the country's annual Constitution Memorial Day. However, those on the other side of the argument also aren't afraid to make their feelings known, including Miyazaki. The veteran animator belongs to a generation that has first-hand experience with armed conflict, and to them, Japan's post-war pacifism is something to be treasured. When Abe made a further attempt to reinterpret Article 9 in 2015, one that would allow the Japanese Self-Defense Force to play a greater military role overseas, Miyazaki revealed in no uncertain terms how he felt about it. Speaking just before the bill was due to be voted on in Parliament, Miyazaki said, "I presume that PM Abe wants to leave his name in history as a great man who changed the interpretation of the Constitution, but I think it's despicable." Japan's 1947 constitution has lasted longer without an official amendment than any other constitution in the world, so that goes some way to explaining why Miyazaki has spoken so passionately about it. And he wasn't the only person from Studio Ghibli who decided to go public with their opinion on Abe's reinterpretation of the peace clause in 2015. Miyazaki's longtime friend and Ghibli co-founder Isao Takahata also spoke out against the PM, telling a Japanese newspaper that changing Article 9 to be more like other countries was a dangerous path to go down. He said, "We don't need to become a normal country. We should continue being a unique country. If we become able to make war, we will surely make war." When the cabinet decided to recognise collective self-defence, Article 9 was suddenly destroyed. Aren't we facing the most shocking crisis ever? I know, because I know war. What's important is the time before war begins. Now, if it begins, we'll be swept away by it. So we need to completely slam on the brakes, not just a little. That's what Article 9 did. When Takahata says that he knows war, he's not kidding. He was just a child during the Second World War, but he saw firsthand how the ordinary citizens of a country can become collateral damage when conflict erupts. When he was 9 years old, he and his family had a lucky escape when they managed to survive a US raid on Okinawa City, which was bombed heavily. Of course, Takahata is best remembered for the heartbreaking World War II film Grave of the Fireflies, which follows two orphaned siblings as they desperately cling to life during the final days of World War II. It's a deeply personal film that reminds viewers about the human cost of war. But like The Wind Rises, it's not supposed to be patriotic. Like Miyazaki, Takahata spoke out about Japan's actions during the Second World War, and he pulled no punches. He said, "During World War II, there were a lot of people who cooperated reluctantly, but most of us marched down the procession of lanterns cheering for victory. Ordinary people would call other ordinary people who didn't agree with them unpatriotic. Young people say to breathe the air. When I hear that, I fall into despair. We Japanese haven't changed at all. Cooperating with those around us is fine, but reading the air doesn't mean cooperation, it means agreement. Falling into step is becoming an absolute value. Since all times, this attitude has led Japan into the bog of war. I call it a slithering attitude." Takahata sadly passed away in 2018, but Miyazaki has kept flying the flag for peace in his honour, and he will likely continue doing so until his dying day. Both men are part of a left-leaning generation in Japan who are well within their rights to express concern about the way things are going with their country, considering what they went through as children. This may make them traitors in the eyes of some people, but nobody can deny that their hearts are in the right place. After all, with everything that's going on in the world right now, I think we can all agree that peace is the only path forward. It's like Jiro said.
Le vent se lève, il faut tenter de vivre. Wind is rising, we must try to live.
As always, thank you so much for watching, everyone, and let me know what you think about Miyazaki's stance on Japan's military status. Is he right to staunchly defend his country's pacifist constitution, or does Japan need to amend Article 9 in the face of rising tensions in the region so it can defend itself and become less reliant on its allies? Cheers guys, I'll catch you in the comments. Cheerio.